Hey kids, I'm on the line, and as always on my show, I get people to introduce themselves. Tell by who you are and where you're from.
Sure. My name is Rob Dietrich. I'm the master distiller and blender for Blackened American whiskey, and I'm based out of Denver, Colorado.
Well, let's start with the beginnings, Rob. For those of you who may not be fans of the brown water, let's start at the beginning. The
But, yeah,
different
well,
the different types of brown liquor are bourbon, which is what?
bourbon it's got to be at least 51% corn and then 49% more corn or rye or barley.
Hmm.
And that's generally what a bourbon is. You can make bourbon really anywhere in the United States. It doesn't have to be in Bourbon County, which is kind of a misnomer. And so bourbon is kind of America's first true whiskey.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then a rye, which is different. How?
Rye is kind of a spicier, more earthier grain. I'm a huge rye fan as well. I love my bourbons. Bourbon, you're going to get a little more sweetness from the corn, and maybe kind of a balance of a little bit of rye or barley in there on a bourbon. With a rye, generally you're going to find people who are going to want a high rye, like a 95% rye, and just a little bit of barley in there to help convert the sugars basically. And a rye is kind of during when the Great Dust Bowl, when they were having a lot of issues with crops, rye was a really hardy plant that was actually stuck around and was able to grow. So rye kind of became America's whiskey for a while during that time. So that then people really got a taste for it.
Okay, now Scotch is different because, well, it's not from here. But besides that, how's it different?
Scotch, in order to be a Scotch, it's got to be made in Scotland.
Hmm.
And it's always really kind of the terroir of your ingredients, where you're sourcing your water. A lot of Scotches are known for their heavily peated, so most people just automatically say I don't like Scotch because they had a heavily peated Scotch. But not all Scotches are heavily peated. You got your Highlands and your Lowlands. Your Isla is always going to be very peaty, and when we say peaty, they're taking literally chunks of peat, which is just centuries old dried marsh, and they're drying it and they're smoking the grain basically during the malting process, and you're going to get a lot of the flavors in the grain from the smoke of that peat. Or water. Their water source has been running across the peat bog, and you're going to get this kind of almost this flavorful water. So it's really based on those kind of identities. But Scotch is, I feel like whiskey as a whole, there's a whiskey for every occasion. So if it's like thunderstorm outside and the windows are rattling from lightning and weather, that might be the time to go pull a bottle of the peaty Scotch off the shelf.
Now, peat to me is just like a second away from coal. It's like it would have been coal. It just didn't get enough pressure, right?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It is like a really dense vegetation, basically. Just it's been kind of fermenting in its own environment for decades to centuries. So it's pretty, and it's actually very well. It preserves things very well as well. It's an interesting environment.
Now, whiskeys tend to be blends, which is, and I want to get into this later on in the conversation. It's you have the Blackened is a blend of ryes and bourbons, and I want to get into how you do that part. But tell me
Sure.
about whiskeys a little bit.
Yeah. So not all whiskeys are blends.
Mm-hmm.
Some whiskeys can be blends. For example, my background in distillation, I was the master distiller for Stranahan's Colorado whiskey in Denver, and we were doing everything from grain to bottle, making an American single malt whiskey. That's 100% barley. Grown and using Colorado water. The barley was grown in Colorado. Excuse me. And aged in brand new white American oak barrels. And for a bourbon, like a straight whiskey, you would definitely want it to be, it needs to be aged in a brand new white American oak barrel. That's with a char. You char the inside of it.
And
Um,
and the char pulls the sugar out of the wood. Is that basically what happens?
yeah, I have a couple of barrels in my backyard. I got this barrel stave here.
Okay.
So it's just a little good visual. When you char the wood, this is a char on the wood here, number 3 char. And whenever you char a barrel, all the natural sugars, the tannins in the wood, the vanillins in the wood are going to create this nice caramelized band of flavor. And you can see right here, you can see the whiskey line where the whiskey's moved in about an inch, about 3/4 to an inch into the wood itself.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to get all that flavor. That spirit's going to interact with the barrel and pull that flavor from the wood and 100% of the color from the wood into the actual spirit. Into
That's
the whiskey.
really where the brown comes from. When you're
Right.
looking at brown liquors, they're barrel aged in some regard.
Correct. Yeah, you're going to use to measure the depth of color. It's really literally the color in whiskey is minuscule amounts of wood particulate. So we'll use a spectrophotometer to measure the actual density of color of the whiskey to give you an idea of like an older whiskey. Something that's been in a barrel for 10 years is going to look a lot darker than a 2-year whiskey or a 4-year whiskey, because it's had so much more time to draw those little minuscule amounts of wood into the whiskey.
All right, so let's move to Blackened a little bit. You sat down. This is the process that fascinates me, because where it becomes individual flavors melding into one flavor. What's the chemistry in your brain that lets you go this and this and this and this? And is it just tasting it over and over again, or is there some chemistry where you can smell it and know what's going to happen?
I generally rely on my olfactory for sure, because you're going to get so much of the elements of the whiskey from nosing the whiskey in the first place. But it really does take practice. I think like anyone can do this at home too. If you've got several whiskeys in your house, mess around with blending. Like pull your favorite whiskey off the shelf and grab a couple other ones. There might be 2 parts of one whiskey and 3 parts of another whiskey. And I always start with a base though. I always know what my base profile is, and then I'll kind of work from there. So I'll use kind of this. Might be my base might be 63% bourbon and 12% rye, and then I'll just kind of tweak it by age and flavor from there. In our case with Blackened, it's definitely a high rye. We've got whiskey from Tennessee, we've got bourbon from Kentucky, we've got bourbon from Indiana, rye from Indiana, Canadian rye. All these elements and at different ages they're an average of 8 years and aged in white American oak. And then we blend all those elements together. So every one of those whiskeys was an extraordinary whiskey on its own. It already stood on its own as a great whiskey. But when you're melding all these flavors together, you're creating a phenomenal whiskey. And that's what's fun about blending with some really extraordinary whiskey is creating something special.
Okay, so after you get your base elixir, I'm gonna go there.
Sure.
Together, you decide, okay, I'm gonna age it. Tell me about black brandy and why the barrel's important.
Yeah, so the whiskey's already been aged when we blend it, and at this point we call this a finishing process. So we're finishing it in black brandy barrels, which are Spanish brandy, and really what I like is creating a balance of all the flavors. You've got that sweetness of the corn and the bourbon, the spiciness, earthiness of the rye that gives it a little kick, and then you've got these black brandy finish that really is kind of like this nice smooth backbone that just kind of creates that balance for all the whiskey to come together. So the way I look at blending whiskey, it really needs to be like a 3-act play. You need to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you don't want to just take the whiskey and you've got a great front taste on it, and the middle's there, and then all of a sudden it just dissipates into disappears into like a dry evaporative finish. You want a nice rolling ending. You want to have that nice final ending, and that's what I'm always looking for in the blending process.
Okay, and that explains a couple of things we're going to get to later about the way this tastes, because I sampled a little bit. Tell me about sonic enhancement, though. I've talked to guys who said, well, we're rotating the barrels or removing the barrels, or some things that are constant rotation. We've got staves in barrels. There are different ways to enhance a whiskey or a bourbon, but sonic enhancement's new, and it's blasting it with Metallica, essentially.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And so what does that do to the barrels, and how much more does that release?
It's pretty exciting. Being a whiskey nerd, I've been making whiskey for over 14 years. I I was really fascinated when I first um, heard about the sonic enhancement. I've always thought about different controlled cavitation and ways to create unusual methods of finishing or enhancing the whiskey. Of course, we're starting with a whiskey that's already aged, but
Mhm.
which is why we're calling this an enhancement. We're not trying to accelerate aging or trade this process for aging. Aging, is important. But what was really fascinating with this was the uh, playing music, playing Metallica music at a very low frequency from a subwoofer type device. We have a proprietary device that was created by Meyer Sound, which is the company that creates the wall of sound for Metallica. So when Metallica's touring, they've got these gigantic speakers, and they love their bass, their heavy bass lines. So we're using a proprietary device that they created specifically for this. Metallica is great at making music. They wanted someone that could make whiskey that understands whiskey. They didn't want to just go to a large company and say, "Hey, make a Metallica line of whiskey." They really wanted a whiskey that was going to stand on its own and be independently theirs. They own it outright. So it was pretty extraordinary to take the world of fermentation and distillation and barrel aging, and then meld it with the world of music, which I've got a background in the rock and roll industry as well. So for me, it was like this really cool full circle to be able to not only make whiskey but able to do it with this sonic enhancement process. And so playing at a very low frequency creates a very rapid vibration with the barrel. So it's aggressively moving that whiskey in and out of the barrel at a very rapid pace. And we did some tests in the early part of this where we had a barrel that we were cask finishing but did not do the sonic enhancement process to, which we call black noise. And then we had a barrel that we did apply the black noise sonic enhancement process to. And we sent those samples off to a lab, and you're looking for 9 different markers, flavor profiles from the barrel. And that's from any whiskey. You're looking for all these elements in there, and every single one of those 9 markers were elevated in the black noise sonic enhanced barrel, which to us proved that our process was working, which I thought was really cool. We're just scratching the surface on what we can actually do with sound. With especially with the heavy hitting sound of Metallica. It's pretty extraordinary.
Well, that bass note is extraordinary in Metallica. The experimentation, actually, the thing that links music and distillers and brewers and chefs all together, I found over the years is passion. It's something that just we're all excited about the thing we do, and when you cross lines like this, it's kind of interesting because do you have a passion for both things, and how does that play itself out? I'm going to hit one more piece of business, and I want to go into you yourself. But if you guys are getting ready to build your own distillery, is it going to have a sound room? Is it going to have a?
Definitely. We're still working on that aspect of it. Right now we're doing all of our production through Mineville, New York, and so we're up there doing all of our process there. That's where we do the sonic enhancement, or blending, or cask finishing. That's where we do the black noise, and it's been something we've been working on. Obviously, COVID has kind of slowed down a lot of people's plans. So for us, we've had to shift gears and adapt with the COVID scenario. And honestly, there's such a clamoring for our whiskey all over the planet that we're increasing our production as quickly as we can, which is always an interesting maneuver during such an interesting crazy time. But eventually we are going to have our own distillery where we will have a sound room, and hopefully it's something that our process is actually being it's trademarked. The black noise is trademarked, and we've applied for patents and on the process. So we really are once we have all the legal aspects of it, we can actually show people what we're doing and not keep it more proprietary as we have been. So I'm really excited about that possibility.
Oh, that'd be great. I've seen a couple of interviews, and you refer to what you do as whiskey art, which goes back to the passion concept. What is There is science in what you do. There is passion in what you do. There is art, and I guess that's where science and passion come together. Tell me what you think about whiskey art.
I definitely, that's the way I feel. I always wanted to be a musician, or like a great musician. That didn't happen. And being an artist, I've always been fascinated with painters and people who could draw and just like draw extraordinary things. That didn't really happen for me either. I think a lot of times people don't understand or recognize what they are. Uh, um, actually talented at, or becoming an artist in something, until suddenly you realize, like, oh, I've been approaching making whiskey as an art. Ever since I started blending, I really felt like it was creating almost like an elaborate painting, but with a taste, with a palate. For me, it's like I can when I'm sipping whiskey, I can almost visualize it in like colors, in a sense. Like I'm visualizing these flavors that kind of almost like a sound wave. If you ever seen like a capture of a sound wave, it's just moving in and out across the taste buds on your tongue. And I feel like it's like almost like directing an orchestra or something. Like there's all these little cacophony of flavors, and to me it's weaving a really kind of colorful piece of art, beautiful tapestry. So I do approach it like art, which I think makes me feel a lot better about it in one way. It takes the less, there is science element, of course, to it. But I like it just feels more passionate when I'm approaching it that way.
All right. Well, for starters, you're a veteran, so happy belated Veterans Day.
Oh, very kind. Thank you.
And you went from that to rock and roll. I want to cover your career a little bit, because you went from the 10th Mountain Division, I think.
Yes. Right? Yep. Absolutely.
Into Bill Graham Presents, which is kind of a different environment.
Yeah.
So what was your
truly
segue from A to B and then B to C when you went into distilling? How did you go from where you were to where you are now, I guess is my question.
No, that's a great question. There's a few adventures along the way in there, but I was in the 10th Mountain Division, did a few tours with them, and got out in the summer of '95. And while I was in the Army, I had been deployed to Somalia a couple of times, and had when I got back from my second tour, I bought this 1967 Chevy school bus, the half bus, the short bus. Yeah. And literally converted that thing into I guess what people consider a tiny home now, but I built it into my adventure seeking house. I literally built that thing in the barracks parking lot. I ran an extension cord out from the barracks window and built that thing in the parking lot. And when I got
over, Uncle Sammy stole electricity, but okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Government employee. And so when I left the Army in '95, I left with my girlfriend at the time. I took off in the bus, and I was stationed upstate New York at Fort Drum, and we just drove across the country to Oregon. I was up there working as a carpenter and surfing for a little while. Learned how to surf in the very cold waters of the Oregon coast, and I took a mountain biking road trip with a couple of buddies from Oregon down to San Francisco, and literally ended up meeting the wife of the guy who ran Bill Graham Presents. Met her in a coffee shop, Deaf Dog Coffee in Petaluma, California, and we were taking, literally, we took several weeks off. We were just mountain biking everywhere. We drove down from Oregon, but we were just mountain biking for days. And there's so many great trails around Petaluma. We were just there for a couple of weeks, and met the wife of the guy who was managing Bill Graham Presents. And at the time, they were building the Tibetan Freedom Concert in Golden Gate Park in '96. And we struck it up with her, had a good friendship, and she said, "Hey, you guys looking for work? My husband is managing this giant concert. They need as many people as they can." And we're like, "Yeah, of course, yeah, we'd love to do that." So she introduced us to him, and my first day working for Bill Graham Presents was as a rigger. And riggers, for anybody out there, it's the guys who climb the high steel and build the steel all the way up. You're building those giant towers to put the speakers in. Because when I was in the 10th Mountain Division, I was mountaineering troop. We were trained in climbing and rock climbing, and so I was ecstatic to be able to literally have. I was like, wait, I can get paid to climb? You got to be kidding me! So I was super stoked about that, and it was such an extraordinary experience. I mean, I got to see so many great acts. Anything from Buddy Guy to the Red Hot Chili Peppers to the Beastie Boys, Smashing Pumpkins, Biz Markie. It was like all these crazy, really amazing artists all together in a pretty extraordinary event. And, it was a 2-day concert. And I was hooked. I mean, I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. So I did about a 10-year stint with the music industry, managing events, managing stages, managing places. I eventually moved back from San Francisco back to Denver, and managed a few places, worked at Red Rocks, worked wherever you could get a show. And it was really kind of a great time because that was the mid 90s to late 90s to early 2000s. So there was a lot of these great bands that were still touring. I toured with James Brown for a little while. And it was just, I really got to have some extraordinary, experiences with some of these bands that were still touring, Allman Brothers, it's just really so many different bands out there. And it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that time of my life. And from there, I did take a little break. I went to South Korea for a little while to, I got out of the music business. The last tour I did was with, I was the tour manager for Lone Star, for a West Coast tour, and it just burned me out. I was like, all right, I'm done. I'm getting out of the music business for a while. I'm just going to go take off. So I was like, I'm good at reinventing myself. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go teach English in South Korea. And I was terrible at it. I was horrible at it. So that didn't last very long, So I ended up coming back to the United States, ran a clothing optional hot springs for a little bit. And from there actually ended up coming back to Denver, and I met the head distiller for Stranahan's whiskey at the time in a bar. We had a mutual passion for vintage motorcycles, and I had a motorcycle that I was building with a buddy of mine. That was we put a diesel engine from a cement mixer into it, and we were running it on vegetable oil. And so I was in.
Sorry, hang on.
Yeah.
That takes a little explanation. What made you look at the cement mixer and go, "Yeah, I could do that"?
Well, we were looking at we needed a diesel engine. We actually found the motorcycle out in the desert in Taos, a little Czechoslovakian motorcycle called the Jawa, and we were like, well, we wanted to make a diesel motorcycle, because that was at the time when running vegetable oil and diesel engines was really starting to get take kind of people were starting to catch on to it. So we wanted to make a motorcycle like that, and we found this cement mixer engine fit almost in that frame. We had to cut the frame a little bit. That thing was a total rat bike. I mean, there was no license for it. There's no plates. We had no paperwork on that thing. We rode it everywhere too. It was I actually shot the fender with my 357. I put a bullet hole through the back because I was like, it's a rat bike. It needs a bullet hole.
Fair. True.
Yeah. So yeah, from there, I met the head distiller for Stranahan's whiskey in a bar. We were talking about motorcycles, and I told him about the diesel bike we were building, and he had a motorcycle he was running off of the heads, which is the waste product from distillation. It's the high proof waste product. So
it's 120 plus proof, right?
It's gonna be like 120, 140 about is what heads are gonna be, and then you can kind of distill that even more and try and get it up, and then remove the water from it to really get a high proof, like methanol basically. And so he was building his bike to do that. So we really hit it off over that. And he's like, well, you should come down to my distillery and check this out. And I was like, wait, there's a distillery here making whiskey? You got to be kidding me. So as soon as I walked in there and saw that 800-gallon copper still, I was like, you have to teach me how to run this thing. I want to know everything about this machine here. And so I started working on the bottling line, and then worked as the night distiller for 4 years straight, from 1 a.m. to 9 a.m. And I'd bring my dog in with me. He'd sleep under the still. And you gotta earn your stripes, when you're first getting in. And that's that's what I first started doing. I just worked my way up from the night distiller to the head distiller position after Jake left, and then eventually into the role of master distiller and blending. And so it was really exciting to kind of keep evolving and learning and training my palate, learning about blending. I created this thing called Snowflake, where I would do different cask finishes with our whiskey. It might be cask finishing in Malbec or rum or cognac or Tempranillo. And I would take, it might be 2 parts Tempranillo, 1 part cognac, and 3 parts rum cask finish. And I would make these blends, and people would literally camp outside the distillery for days on end in the middle of December in Colorado to buy a couple of bottles. So really, for me, it was always a lot of fun. I always had a lot of great time interacting with everybody, camping out there, and that really kind of put my my career on the map, so to speak, by doing those blends. So, which led to Blackened, which for me, it's a full circle experience coming back from rock and roll. I did actually work with Metallica as a stagehand pushing boxes at Lollapalooza when they headlined Lollapalooza in '96. I actually worked that show, and then to come full circle to be able to make whiskey with Metallica, honestly, is just a huge honor, and I couldn't be more ecstatic about it.
Brown liquor has undergone a renaissance. There was a moment in America, I wanted to say 20, but it's actually probably closer to 30 years ago, where most of the bourbon, most of the whiskey that got made in America got shipped overseas. Overseas had a much bigger appetite, specifically Japan, for it than we did. It's undergone a renaissance, and we've adopted it back as our home spirit again. What do you think went into that?
It's interesting. I think about 30 years ago, everyone was drinking vodka. Vodka was the drink. I think it was the, that you were mixing it, you're making martinis. Everybody was just really into vodka, and brown spirits was, for some people, but there were only a handful of the big dogs that were making whiskey that we were drinking in the United States. You were either choosing between 1 to 10 different whiskeys from the U.S., and that was it. You didn't really have much else to choose from. And if you wanted a single malt, you were going to go get it from Scotland. Even Japanese whiskey wasn't really around yet at that point. So it was pretty extraordinary to see this resurgence of people really wanting to try new whiskey, and craft distilling really just changed the whole face of whiskey in itself. When I was working with Stranahan's was the 21st distilling license or distilling permit issued since the end of Prohibition in the United States. So that just tells you a lot about how people and people thought, my boss at the time, who's also my mentor, Jess Graber, they thought he was nuts. Like, why would you want to create a whiskey and go up against the big dogs? That's like trying to start a car company and go up against Chevy and Ford and Dodge. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. But he's a hard-headed kind of fellow. So he definitely stuck with his guns, and that was really kind of the forefront of this huge tidal wave of craft whiskeys, which also turned into craft spirits in general. The gin and vodka all just kind of blew up from what we traditionally would drink. But really, I think brown spirits, whiskey has really topped, and I don't even think it's plateaued yet. I think it's continuing to be what everyone seeks. They're seeking all these unique and unusual styles, because that's, we're not limited to some of the more traditional ways that are, were required for like Scotch or Irish whiskey. There's a lot more wiggle room as long as we're sticking within the guidelines of a type of whiskey. It's got to be in white American oak, no less than 2 years to be in order to be called a straight whiskey. There's all these guidelines. As long as you keep within those buffer, there's so much room to really create anything, any kind of flavor profile. So I think that in itself, people's palates have grown. They seek out more unusual flavor profiles, and people want to know the story. They want to hear a story behind the whiskey, because there generally is one. There's a great one, especially if it's a good whiskey.
Well, let's talk tasting Blackened for a second. And I got a chance to taste a little. It's got a bright front. And I think the thing that surprised me the most, and I'm a bourbon drinker because I grew up in the South and that's what we drank around here.
Yeah,
But
sure.
the thing that surprised me is how smooth and how sweet it was on the back of the tongue going down. It was like I drink it neat because I don't believe in ice cubes. But I know some people who do. I like the alcohol front, and then it got sweet on the sides of the tongue, and then the back though is normally on a bourbon it's almost bitter. It's got a lot of dark tannins in it,
Sure.
and Blackened had a sweet sort of like, oh, it's not super sweet. It's not one of those things where you get into some of the whiskey substitutes, we'll call them that.
Sure.
But it's like it had a nice sweet finish, and you swallow and you get a little burn on your throat, but the back of your tongue doesn't get that bitter tannin thing that bourbon does.
Yeah, that's the black brandy. Kind of that sweetness of the black brandy, really balancing well with the corn. I think that's that sweetness. And what I like about it, it's well balanced. It's not that cloying sweet like a if you drink a port or something that just has that really thick
Stick
sweet
to your tongue a little
cloying.
bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really enjoy that this is a well balanced, that there is sweetness in there, but it's not so sweet that it's too much. Because I don't really have a sweet tooth myself. I actually like a little bit of that sweet, but I love the that spiciness of the rye. That earthy tone that is really going to kind of again create that balance. But I think that sweet finish, that nice smooth aspect, of a mouthfeel, it does come from the brandy finish.
It's kind of fascinating. It's like one of those things where I tasted it and I was expecting that bourbon like bitter finish at the end, and I was like, oh, it doesn't do that. And I was like, all right. And so I like sipped again, and I was like, all right, we're sure what we tasted was what we tasted. And I went again, and I was like, you know what? It's got it hits the back of your tongue, and it turns really sweet, but not. It's a fruit sweet. It's not a like cloying sugar sweet, I guess. Is
Right.
what I'm trying to
Yeah,
say.
and that's what I like about it as well. I really feel like that. It's almost like this again, like this backbone that kind of holds the other two elements together, that bourbon and the rye. You got the backbone of the that brandy flavor that really again just kind of creates the kind of the ridge pole of a really cool whiskey tent, I guess.
No, it's been fascinating. Rob, I appreciate you taking the time today. I know I like probably walked you through probably more than you were expecting there, but
No, not at all. I'm a whiskey nerd, man. I love talking about whiskey, so we could talk for hours.
but I really appreciate it. Lovely beverage that you have made. What's the next thing? Can you give us any like deep dark secrets? What's the next thing on the release list?
Well,
What
there
are you
is
working
something
on?
out there that we just released. I got a little bit here. That's I don't know if you can see the box there. This is a batch 100. This was a special batch that we did the sonic enhancement with the playlist from the S&M2 concert, which was Metallica and the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra from last September. I was very fortunate to get to attend that concert. It was mind blowing. And we used that playlist from that live concert for the sonic enhancement black noise process on this batch. So we did a specialty box that the artwork is done by Squindo, who does a lot of artwork for Metallica, and that was a fun release. It's also the first time that we dabbled in releasing a cask strength. So there is another version of that batch 106 that is cask strength, available only very limited areas right now because we're still getting it under our feet. But
Well, let's stop down for a minute. Cask strength for the listener who hasn't ever tried it. What's the difference between that and what you're buying in an everyday?
Right. So Blackened Original is 90 proof. Still, a pretty high proof. I like to keep it a little higher myself because I like to sip whiskey neat. If anything, I'm going to open it up with just the tiniest amount of filtered water, like an eyedropper splash into there to help the whiskey open up and bloom. If I do need a cocktail, if I'm drinking a cocktail, I jokingly call Blackened and ice is my favorite cocktail. Like I don't like to mess with the flavor profile. I want to taste the whiskey myself. So cask strength is going to be exactly that. It's going to be the strength of the whiskey, the proof of the whiskey as it comes out of the barrel. So in this case, I think it was 110.7. Generally, our whiskey goes in at 110 proof, and the proof will go up in the barrel over time because the water will evaporate before the alcohol. So you're going to get a lot of proof, less volume, but more proof over time in a barrel. So a little cask strength out there, just dabbling into that. And then next year, the band actually turns 40. So we are. I've been working on
it made me feel really old there, Rob. I'm sorry.
I know, man. Yeah, they were formed in 1981. So 2021 is 40 years. It's crazy.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm
high school
doing a special,
listening to this, by the way, but that's okay.
Right. I'm doing a special whiskey release for in honor of their anniversary. So next year there is going to be some really exciting stuff to keep your eyes peeled on the horizon.
All right. Well, Rob, I appreciate you taking time today. It's been a fascinating conversation. You can find Metallica Blackened in a lot of different places. The 106, the most recent release that you were just holding up the box for, what's the best way to find that? Is it go to the website? Is it go to your local store? Or do you know somebody?
You can definitely ask at your local store. You can go to our website. We have a store locator on there, so you can actually go to blackenedwhiskey.com and you can, and there's a little icon up there for the store locator, and then just type in your zip code, and you should be able to find a store near you that carries it.
All right. You know what? Go out and get yourself some. It's a easy sipping whiskey. Well, I think I blew up there, but anyway, I'll keep talking. It's an easy sipping whiskey. It's beautiful. It's a lot of fun, and I appreciate you taking the time with me today. Really do.
It was such a pleasure, Doc. I appreciate your time, and it was great talking with you as well.